Hey, welcome back. My name's Brent, and today I'm going to see if I can tear some stuff up. You may notice that I've got a GoPro set up here and another one set up here, both staring at my CVT area. And that is because this drive belt has about 150 miles on it now. And anyone that's followed my videos for a while knows that I go through belts very quickly. Usually I can expect somewhere around 100 to 200 miles, usually about 150 to 200 miles out of a belt before they end up breaking while I'm riding, or I just have to replace them before that happens. So this one is measured at 16.8 millimeter width now from 17.5 millimeters originally. And usually by this point, it's about time that this thing pops. So what I've decided to do today may not be the smartest thing ever, but I think I'm going to try to use these two cameras and see if I can get a drive belt to pop while I'm riding it, while they're filming, so we can all see exactly what happens. Before I go any further, I want to make it abundantly clear that this is not a great idea, and I do not recommend that anyone does this. In fact, I recommend that no one tries this, because while a lot of us, if you've been riding scooters for a while, you've probably experienced a belt failure, and most of the time it goes smoothly. It's not really a big deal. And by smoothly, I mean you're broken down on the side of the road, but it's kind of uneventful. You just got to get that repaired, and then you can be back on your way. However, sometimes it does not go well at all. I have had belt failures where the belt wraps around something, and then the rear tire gets locked up. Another problem for me is that I cannot film this with the CVT cover in place. It has been suggested that I make a CVT cover with a plexiglass window and then try to film through there. However, I don't think that's going to turn out very well. I think I'm going to need the cover off in order to be able to see what's happening. So with that said, the CVT cover does act as a support for this sort of swing arm, this long section of the case here. And it helps to take some of the stress off the case, right, especially in this central area between the engine up front and the gearbox out back, because these things have cracked. They are known to have cracked in the past. Thankfully, I've never had it happen to me, but I have seen it happen to at least one forum member who showed pictures of his case cracked right in half there. And obviously at that point, your rear tire basically falls off while you're riding. Not cool at all. So that's another risk. Again, don't try it. Just let me do this and watch from home. Since I don't have the cover, I have no way to start the scooter because I don't have electric start and I can't have a Kickstarter mounted when the cover's not in place. So what I'm going to do is just start this with a drill, and then I've got my CVT cover in a backpack around my handlebars, hanging from my handlebars. That way I can have it if the belt does indeed fail, and then I need to get it started after I repair it on the side of the road, hopefully. rode around for about an hour and put 35 miles on the scooter and never managed to break the belt. I tried being quick into the throttle and out of the throttle, I tried rolling into the throttle and out of the throttle. I tried holding it wide open. I tried a little less throttle, various cruising speeds. Nothing I did broke the belt. No signs of the belt fraying or anything. So apparently this isn't going to be as easy as I thought it was to break the belt. I did manage to break something else though. Here's how I had the rear camera set up. So I just used a piece of 1/8" steel. I bolted that to the lower shock mount and welded a tab on there so that I could actually mount the GoPro easily to that. I think that this thing has way too much vibration for the camera because this GoPro that was in there is now totally unresponsive. I had already actually killed the rear screen in the past because I took this thing down to the swamp and some water got into the housing. I didn't have the sealed back on there. And since then the rear screen wasn't working, but the camera has been working just fine other than that. But it is now totally unresponsive. I've tried every recovery operation I can find online and it's just not working. So I think I actually had so much vibration from a solid mount right to the engine basically that it just couldn't take it, and that camera is no good anymore. Even the file that you saw, the video, I had to use a recovery software and it only recorded, I only got the first 7 minutes of the ride. So that camera is no good anymore. In addition to that, I noticed that I have residue all over the exhaust. I found coolant dripped onto this hose in some areas below the water pump. And I noticed that behind this pulley, the bearing back there looks rusty and there's all kinds of residue on that. And I now have more play in this shaft than I ever had before. So I assume the bearings and probably the seal in there are not much good anymore. They're still working, but probably in the future you'll be seeing me replacing the bearings on that or trying to rebuild it or maybe replacing the water pump. I'm going to move the shims that I have on here for the drive boss off of there and put them on the outside, the other side of the fixed half. Because I think with the belt being more narrow now, it's not getting a very good drive ratio. It's not trying to work its way toward the outside of the front pulley as much as it normally would. I'm noticing that when I was riding, I'm topping out just over 60 miles per hour when it should be approaching 70. And that's at 14,200 RPM, something like that. So it's wound out, but it just doesn't seem to have the gear ratio to go any faster. And I've seen from the video that the pulley or the belt is not getting very far outward in the pulley. So I'm just moving those. That should help the belt get a little further outward, hopefully. And maybe that will be enough to push it over the edge and allow it to actually break the belt. Unfortunately, I only have 2 GoPros, or actually 1 now after the latest mishap. But I do have this old camcorder that I used to use to make my videos, and I was considering selling it, but I don't think it's really worth much money anyway, so I decided I would try to mount it the same way that the old GoPro was. I did have to modify the mount a bit, and the focal length is way different on this, so it gets a really tight shot of the rear pulley. I have a feeling it's going to vibrate itself to death or maybe just fall off of there, but it's worth a shot. I rode another 25 miles with the shims moved in the variator, and I still didn't manage to break the belt. I did manage to very quickly disable the rear camera this time. It didn't even make it a mile from my house before the camcorder shut off, and it looks like the battery for the camcorder is totally unresponsive. It's rattled something loose in there, even in that short amount of time, so that's why you didn't see much footage from the rear camera. And plus, as you saw, there was a lot of vibration and the shot wasn't really worth a whole lot anyway. Maybe you've noticed when watching the video that I actually get the maximum belt travel when I'm out of the throttle. It's not when I'm wide open throttle or at a high speed. It's after I let out of the throttle that the belt travels the furthest toward the outside of the front pulley and the most inward on the rear pulley. So basically, if you were cruising at say 60 miles per hour at 14,000 RPM and you let out of the throttle, if the belt didn't do this, then you would gradually slow down and RPM would go with your speed. However, if the belt then shifts outward like it does, so you get a higher speed ratio, it allows engine RPM to drop when you get out of the throttle. So my thought up till now has been that that is when I was breaking belts. I thought that when it tried to push outward further, it tried to get the maximum travel so that it could shift as much as it could into a higher ratio and allow the engine RPM to drop. I thought it was going to snap the belt at that point because I figured the narrower belt that's been worn and perhaps wear on the cords in the belt, or maybe they have some sort of damage after a while, would just be too much for the belt to take when it tries to shift into that sort of maximum ratio. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening. So I'm going to go back and watch videos that I have of previous belt failures and just make sure I don't have this mixed up in my own head about how the belt actually is breaking. After watching those videos, it looks like I was wrong about when I should expect the belt to break, and rather than being when I let out of the throttle, it seems to be happening under steady throttle, which actually makes more sense in a way, because I guess when you let out of the throttle, it's probably not putting the maximum force on the belt, and there shouldn't be as much stress on the belt, even though it is shifting to a higher speed ratio. So I guess I need to just ride around and try to keep pretty high speed. Doesn't look like it has to be necessarily top speed for it to break, but kind of get into the throttle and hold the throttle somewhere near my top speed, at least 50 miles per hour plus, and maybe it'll break for me that way. I'm going to give it another go, but before I do, I wanted to show you that I have butchered this old CVT cover that I had around. And I chopped it up so that hopefully it will let enough light in and provide enough open area that we'll still be able to see what happens with the camera, but it should provide some support to the case. I've tried to leave the center section very intact here and enough of the frame around the bottom especially intact that it will support the case, so I'm at less risk for my case breaking. I also think it may be a good thing that I can now have the extra support for the rear pulley. I don't know that it will really matter that much. This may be kind of far-fetched, but perhaps taking any extra movement or play out of there, not allowing the rear pulley to move so much, could actually put more pressure or tension on the belt because it's not getting a flex there. Again, that may be kind of far-fetched, but I think this will be much safer. Also, at the end of the last ride, I actually had to push the scooter the last 8th mile toward home because it stalled when I stopped at a stop sign. I was close enough to my house that I just decided to push it rather than reinstall the CVT cover that I had draped across my handlebars. So this way I can easily start it if I need to. I do want to point out that any areas where I thought there could be contact between the CVT cover and the belt when there's slack in the belt, I went over them with a file and smoothed those edges out because I don't want a sharp edge on the CVT cover to be the cause of a belt snapping. I'm hoping that it breaks just as it normally would. You probably noticed that I told you about a CVT cover and then there was none there when I went to ride. What happened was I installed the CVT cover and tried to kickstart the scooter and realized that the kickstart in that CVT cover is not in very good shape because it was hard to kick over and wouldn't return. So I took that off and just used an electric drill to start it like I have been. And then I found that the scooter didn't want to idle. So if you recall, at the end of my last ride, I told you that it stalled at a stop sign and I just pushed it the rest of the way home. And then I hadn't started it or tried to start it till now. And apparently I have something going on that's causing idle issues because it won't stay running. I turned the idle speed screw way in, and I mean way in, to get it to idle just at 2400 RPM or so, and it would stay running at that point. I also tried some mixture adjustments, but it didn't do a whole lot for me. So I got it to stay running what I thought was well enough to ride, and then I just took it out without the CVT cover on. I got 5 to 7 miles in, realized that the rear camera was no longer on, and figured I'd stop just to see if I could turn it back on or if the camera was dead at that point. I stopped, and then the scooter died. So I had to put my normal CVT cover back on that I was carrying around in a backpack to get it started. I just couldn't walk away from the throttle at all after that, so I couldn't take the CVT cover back off, and I just rode the rest of the way home. So I really need to take care of whatever is happening that is causing me to have an erratic idle or not be able to keep it idling. And also my water pump is getting even worse, so I think before I do any more belt test rides that I need to take care of those things. Also, I did manage to apparently totally break the rear camera, the camcorder, because now the video shows only red or red and black. The rough idle and engine stalling issues turned out to be some pretty serious problems. So first off, I found that I had low compression, so I took the engine apart and I found a very large chunk of the cylinder plating missing above the exhaust port, and then another fairly large chunk also above the exhaust port. So that cylinder was garbage. Luckily, I have a newer version, exact same cylinder, but it only has about 280 miles on it, so I installed that instead and got the engine back together. I also took the carburetor apart because it was leaking fuel and I wanted to check the float height. I found that there was a crack in the metal tab that allows you to adjust the float height, and when I tried to adjust it, the tab broke totally off, so I had to do a rebuild or put a rebuild kit in the carburetor to replace the float, and so far it's not leaking fuel and seems to be idling and revving well. Now I still need to take it down the road before I do any more belt braking tests, because I do like to do a heat cycle, get some heat into the engine, and then allow it to cool and retorque the cylinder studs or cylinder nuts, as well as some other fasteners. So hopefully I won't break a belt doing that, and then I can get back to trying to break a belt in the future. I also took apart the kickstart mechanism on this modified CVT cover because I would really like to be able to have this CVT cover in place so it can support the engine while I'm riding around trying to bust belts. And basically all I had to do was some cleanup. It was especially nasty around the bushing, the part that goes through the CVT cover here. And with a little bit of cleanup, it seems to be able to kick and return pretty well, so it should be a working cover for me. I also picked up a little bit of camera equipment because I really didn't like the idea of only having one, not having a backup for the future or anything. And also, since the car show back in October, I was editing the footage from Ryan Ott and myself. He has GoPro Hero 8s and I have GoPro Hero 4s. There's a definite difference in the picture, so I wanted to upgrade anyway. I ended up picking up a Hero 9. I got a housing for that, and these don't need a housing, but I actually like the idea of a housing because of the kind of rough use that they get on scooters, motorcycles, etc. I just think it's a good idea for me. And I picked up this roll bar mount that has multiple kind of rubber inserts in there, so hopefully that will dampen some vibration. I've got it mounted here on the top of my shock, so it is a bit more isolated from the bottom, the shock mount there. If the engine's running, I can feel both areas, and there's a whole lot more vibration down here closer to the engine than there is up here at the top of the shock. So I'm hoping that this will allow me to get a good shot looking down at the rear pulley, the opening in the CVT cover. I got through the warm-up ride without the belt breaking, so then I did the retorque on the cylinder nuts as well as all the exhaust fasteners, and I looked at the video footage. The only thing I noticed with the Hero 9 is I think I need to turn the image stabilization off because it makes it look like the camera's moving all around, and I just wanted it focused on the rear pulley. So I've turned that off, and now I'm going to go out and actually try to ride and see if this belt will brake for me. I rode about 6 miles with lots of wide open throttle, doing about 60 to 66 miles per hour at roughly 14,000 to 14,400 RPM because of the narrowed belt. In this clip, I came to a stop sign, then I accelerated away, and I got up to about 60 miles per hour and then got in and out of the throttle a couple of times. I've paused the video here because right after this, the engine suddenly felt like it was under a heavy load and the sound changed and it struggled to accelerate. Now, the GoPros unfortunately didn't pick up the change in the sound as much as I could tell being on the scooter, but I think if you watch carefully, especially watch the variator, you'll be able to see exactly when this happened. Now, at this point, I didn't get out of the throttle because what I thought was happening was that the belt was braking and maybe starting to shred, but it wasn't braking totally. So I actually got back into the throttle a couple of times thinking I was going to snap the belt totally. I wanted to destroy the belt if it was going. But what ended up happening was the engine died, and then I got off of the scooter, realized the belt was still intact, and I pushed it to a parking lot so I could look at it a little better instead of being on the side of the road. So again, watch the variator closely in this clip. I was expecting to find that the belt was tore up, but it's fine. However, this doesn't rotate too well, and I can hear something kind of crunchy in there. It gets to a point where it just wants to stop sometimes. Right there. Doesn't feel good. Yeah, the plug isn't as bad as I thought it would be. I was kind of expecting to see aluminum all over it or something. I just called for the truck. I don't know what's going on. I don't think it's good. I'm kind of afraid it's either the crankshaft or the cylinder. Doesn't appear to be in the CVT. Didn't take it apart any further, but really don't think it's in there. So I'm going to get a ride home in the truck, and then I'll be able to get a better look when I'm home. As you can see, I've got it home and the engine's up on the workbench. At this point, I really think it's either the crankshaft or the bearings or all of the above, especially because I can get a good listen now without all the road noise and wind that was going on, and it really sounds crunchy. I wish you could feel the motion of the crankshaft yourself, because it feels very rough right now as well. So I think it's bottom end, but I'm going to take the variator off first just to have a look. something sharp back there. This does not want to move very well. Well, here's a new one to me. I've never done this one before. You can see I've got a very large crack across the ramp plate here. Another crack that appears to at least go very near the center over here. And then this one that was forming right there. I'm not sure if this was the cause of a failure or if something else happened maybe to the crankshaft, and then that's why this ended up cracking from the vibration of that. Perhaps the crank got out of true and then that broke. You would think with the cracks that this would be easy to remove, but it's actually quite the opposite, and it is stuck on there pretty well. I can't just pry it off with my hands. So I think I'm going to apply a little heat around there just to see if it helps at all. And then I'll try to get in there and maybe pry it a little bit. Not how I'd like to remove it, but it doesn't want to budge otherwise. There's the other side of the ramp plate. You can see that crack did indeed go all the way through. The others didn't actually make it through. This one was starting up there a little bit. And then there's where this ran into the boss on the crankcase where the electric start clutch usually rides. Surprisingly, it didn't seem to damage the variator at all. Everything seems to be okay there. Now with the variator out of the way, take a look at the inside of the seal there around the crankshaft, and you can see that doesn't look right. And sometimes when I rotate it around, you can actually kind of tell that it is not running true in there. And sounding even worse right at the moment. Alright, so let's take the top end off. While I'm taking these O-rings off of here, one thing that was mentioned in the comments of one of my last videos when I assembled this was that I should put the O-rings in the cylinder head when I install the cylinder head, and I agree with you. That's how I normally did it, but with these smaller O-rings that fit snug to the studs, I actually found that they seem to be more likely to snag on something, especially because I believe these heads are drilled just a little off, or at least this one here is. It's just a little off, so I had better luck putting the O-rings on the studs and then putting the head on in this case. But yes, normally I would put them in the head and then slide the whole head assembly on. I basically just wiped these off so I could get a better look, but the piston actually looks pretty good. I don't see any real damage to it. Looks like it was running lean, but again, when you look at that seal on the other side, no big surprise there. The cylinder also looks pretty good. You can see there's some scuffing in there, just some marks going down the bore, but there's nothing that I can feel with a fingernail. So I have a feeling with a little bit of very light hand honing, that will probably look totally fine. And not related to this failure really, but the other thing I'm noticing is that I do have a line all the way around separating the bore from the outside, the coolant, etc. That's on both the cylinder head as well as the cylinder deck. So it looks like, even though it hadn't been together for very many miles, once again the little aluminum inserts there didn't fail. I don't really feel or hear or see anything going on with the connecting rod. I was actually expecting to see a little more excitement, we'll say, in the crankcase area, but just looking into here, it doesn't look too bad to me. However, again, it's obvious that when I rotate the crank, you can still hear something going on in there. So I'm going to go ahead and begin to get these cases split, take the stuff off of there and split the cases. It looks like the crankshaft actually got bad enough that it started chewing away at the plastic on the inside of the stator, I guess from not being true. Didn't seem to affect the flywheel at all, or the rotor. It did chew it up enough that it exposed a little bit there, and you can see it started chewing through in this spot. A little bit there, and got partway through there. So this wouldn't be a 100% sealed unit anymore, but hopefully with a little bit of cleanup this thing should still work fine. You can see I've got chunks of the polymer that was around the bearings inside here. And there's also some little metal bits. Nothing too large, but small chunks hanging out in there. And when you look at this side, you can see all of that polymer section is gone. And also the cage that holds the steel balls in place is missing. So the good news is all the ball bearings themselves are still in place. There's no catastrophic failure, no huge chunks of stuff that went through the engine, and luckily it doesn't appear that the rest of the engine has been damaged. I wanted to see how true the crankshaft runs just out of curiosity, so I set it up here with a couple of dial indicators. And on this side it's not bad. It looks like maybe 2 thousandths max, usually about 1 to 1.5 thousandths that I can see in there. On this side it goes more like 7, 8 thousandths, something like that. So normally if you were going to true a crank and you put 2 dial indicators on there, you would kind of see an equal and opposite reaction, we'll say. You wouldn't see one side have 1 to 2 thousandths and another side have 8 thousandths. So I'm assuming that the stresses from that bearing going must have really knocked something out of alignment and kind of bent this end of the crankshaft. Either way, it doesn't matter, and I'll show you why in a second. If you look here, you can see that the splines on the crankshaft are damaged where the ramp plate interacts with it. And it's all the way around, better in some areas than others. But it's in rough shape. And if you pair that with the fact that I just shown you that it's more out of whack on one side than the other. And by the way, I did have the drive boss on this side to try and get a smooth section there. But as far as I can tell, that's not coming from the drive boss. The big end of the connecting rod there, everything actually seems really good on that. No reason to replace the crank for that. The small end has actually had small damage in the past from one of the failures, and I just kind of buffed it out. So it's not necessarily ideal, but just knowing it went through the stress, having the damage here and being a little out of whack, I'm not even going to make an attempt to true this up. I'm just going to go ahead and replace it. At the beginning of the video, I said this, and today I'm going to see if I can tear some stuff up. I think I lived up to that pretty well. I never did get the belt, but I took out 2 cameras. The water pump bearings and seal failed. The plating chipped off of a cylinder, so now that's no good. The float broke in the carburetor. The crankshaft bearing went and took the crankshaft with it, along with the variator ramp plate, and it chewed up the stator a bit. And plus, there's also seals and gaskets and O-rings, etc. that go along with all of that stuff. So I am officially going to wave the white flag and hope that the belt accepts my truce, because I have never tore up so much stuff in such a short period of time doing what I thought was going to be a simple operation. And I thought the dangerous part was going to be if the rear wheel locked up when I broke the belt, or if the case broke or something like that when I first had no case on there for reinforcement. Turns out that wasn't the risky part of what I was doing, apparently. So anyway, I'm not going to worry about breaking that belt again right away. Maybe sometime in the future. I would really like to see that happen on camera, so again, hopefully in the future. But for now, I have went ahead and ordered the crankshaft, and I've got bearings and seals here. Gasket kit, the ramp plate is on order, so hopefully I'll be able to get that together before too long. I know a lot of people have pushed and told me I need to try a new engine combination, but there is one more thing at least that I would like to try with a TPR 86cc before I call it done, just to see if it actually makes much difference. So look for that in the future. With that said, also the crankshaft made it 2,400 and I believe 29 miles before it failed. And honestly, I think it would have been fine if that bearing didn't go. The crankshaft would probably still be going. But anyway, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like the video if you found it enjoyable, entertaining, helpful, etc. And subscribe for more so you don't miss what's coming up. Thanks again.